a clandestine government operation that had remained hidden for 30 years, all revealed because one man chose compassion over convenience during the worst blizzard in half a century. The injured stranger whose blood in the snow would lead to a revelation that intelligence agencies around the world had been searching for. And the humble farmer whose act of kindness would eventually grant him access to presidential secrets that would change the course of history. Before we dive into this extraordinary story, tell us where you're watching from in the comments. And if this intrigues you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something truly remarkable for you. The winter wind howled across the barren fields as Jackson Reed trudged through knee-deep snow toward his weathered pickup truck. At 42, the third-generation farmer had never seen a season as brutal as this one, or a financial situation as dire. 3 consecutive years of drought followed by an early freeze had devastated his crops, leaving him with mounting debts and dwindling options. Just need to make it through winter, Jackson muttered to himself, his breath clouding in the frigid air as he struggled to start his truck's reluctant engine. The county extension office had promised information about emergency agricultural loans, his last hope for saving the 200-acre farm that had been in his family since his grandfather returned from World War II. The local radio crackled with warnings about the approaching storm system. This is shaping up to be the worst blizzard in 50 years, folks. If you're not home already, you should be heading there now. Emergency services are stretched thin, and many roads will soon be impassable. Jackson had planned to be home long before the worst hit, but the loan officer's unexpectedly thorough questions had delayed him. The news wasn't good. Without substantial collateral or a miracle-growing season next year, the bank would likely foreclose by summer. As he navigated the increasingly treacherous rural highway, visibility deteriorating with each passing minute, Jackson noticed something unusual: fresh skid marks veering off the road and down the steep embankment toward Miller's Creek. Most would have driven past, especially with the storm intensifying, but something made Jackson pull over. "Hello?" he called, carefully making his way down the icy slope, flashlight in hand. "Anybody down there?" At first, he saw nothing but swirling snow. Then his beam caught a reflection, tail lights barely visible where a black sedan had plunged into the frozen creek bed. Inside, a man slumped against the deployed airbag, blood trickling from a gash on his forehead. The driver, perhaps in his 50s with a military short haircut, was unconscious but breathing. Jackson noted the man's rigid posture, even in unconsciousness, and his unexpectedly formal attire, a quality suit beneath an expensive overcoat, odd choices for these remote backroads. "Hey, you're going to be okay," Jackson said, checking for additional injuries. "I'm going to get you out of here." With considerable effort, Jackson extracted the injured man from the wreckage. As he did, the stranger murmured incoherently, something that sounded like secure and package repeated several times. "Hospitals 30 miles away and definitely inaccessible in this weather," Jackson explained, though he doubted the man could hear him. "My farm's just 5 miles down the road. I'll get you warmed up and call for help when we're there." As Jackson maneuvered his truck back onto the highway, now barely visible beneath the intensifying snowfall, he noticed something unusual. The injured man carried no wallet, no phone, no identification of any kind. His only possession was a strange key unlike any Jackson had ever seen, with complex electronic components built into its head. "Who are you, friend?" Jackson wondered aloud, glancing at his unconscious passenger as they crawled through the worsening storm. 20 minutes later, Jackson pulled up to his farmhouse, a 2-story structure built by his grandfather in the 1950s and maintained with increasingly limited resources over the decades. The barn and outbuildings were barely visible through the snow, which was now falling so heavily it seemed to erase the world beyond his headlights. With considerable effort, he managed to get the stranger inside and onto the living room couch. The man remained unconscious, but stable, as Jackson cleaned and bandaged the head wound as best he could. His farm first aid kit had seen plenty of use over the years, but he worried this situation called for more medical care than he could provide. When he tried his landline, the storm had already taken down the lines. His satellite internet showed no connectivity. They were completely isolated. "Looks like it's just you and me until this passes," Jackson told the unconscious man, building up the fire in the old stone fireplace that had heated the house for generations. As the night deepened and the storm raged outside, Jackson periodically checked on his mysterious guest. Around midnight, while adding logs to the fire, he noticed something that had escaped his attention earlier: a small, unusual scar behind the man's right ear, perfectly straight and about an inch long, unlike a typical injury. Curious, Jackson examined the strange key he'd found in the man's pocket. Upon closer inspection, it wasn't a conventional key at all, but something more sophisticated, possibly electronic, with what looked like a miniature circuit board embedded in its handle. Jackson's golden retriever, Max, normally friendly to everyone, maintained a strange vigilance near the stranger, not aggressive but unusually alert. It was as if the dog sensed something extraordinary about their visitor. "What do you think, Max? Who have we brought home?" Jackson asked, scratching the dog's ears. While making coffee in the kitchen to help stay awake, Jackson's gaze fell on an old photo on the refrigerator, himself in army fatigues during his brief military service before returning to take over the family farm after his father's heart attack. Something about the unconscious man's bearing reminded him of his commanding officers, that indefinable military presence that never quite fades. What Jackson Reed couldn't know, as he settled into his grandfather's old armchair for the night, was that 1,400 miles away in Washington, D.C., emergency protocols had been activated across multiple government agencies. In the secure underground facility, intelligence officers were tracking the last known GPS coordinates of the black sedan now half buried in Miller's Creek. The stranger on Jackson's couch was not simply a lost traveler caught in a storm, and the key in Jackson's possession, now placed casually on the kitchen counter, would soon become the focus of one of the most intensive search operations in recent history. The blizzard that had trapped them together would be long remembered in the E region, not for its record snowfall, but for what it revealed when the thaw finally came. The morning light filtered weakly through frost-covered windows as Jackson Reed awoke with a start, momentarily disoriented to find himself in his grandfather's armchair rather than his bed. The events of the previous night came rushing back as his gaze fell upon the stranger, still unconscious on his living room couch, breathing steadily beneath the pile of quilts Jackson had provided. Outside, the blizzard had finally passed, leaving behind a transformed landscape. 3 feet of snow blanketed everything in sight, pristine and beautiful, but effectively sealing them off from the outside world. The rural roads wouldn't be cleared for days, and even Jackson's tractor, equipped with a snowplow attachment, would struggle with drifts this deep. "Morning, Max," Jackson greeted his golden retriever, who had maintained his vigil beside the couch throughout the night. The dog wagged his tail, but didn't abandon his post, eyes still fixed on their unexpected guest. Jackson checked his satellite phone again, still no signal. The storm must have damaged one of the transmission towers. His landline remained dead as well, confirming his suspicion that they were completely isolated until the county plows made it out to these remote back roads, which could take days given the severity of the storm. As he stoked the fire and prepared a simple breakfast of coffee and oatmeal, Jackson heard a groan from the living room. The stranger was finally regaining consciousness. "Take it easy," Jackson advised, approaching cautiously as the man's eyes fluttered open, sharp, alert eyes that seemed to instantly assess their surroundings despite the injury. "You had a nasty accident last night. Your car went off the road, into Miller's Creek. I brought you to my farm since the hospital was too far in the storm." The man's hand immediately went to his jacket pocket, his expression shifting from confusion to controlled alarm when he found it empty. "Looking for this?" Jackson asked, holding up the unusual electronic key. "It was the only thing in your pockets. No wallet, no phone, no ID. Made me a bit curious about who I brought into my home." The stranger's eyes narrowed, studying Jackson with an intensity that was almost uncomfortable. "Thank you for your assistance," he finally said, his voice surprisingly steady and authoritative despite his condition. "My name is Daniel Harrison. I'd appreciate the return of my property and access to a phone." Something about the way he delivered this information struck Jackson as rehearsed. During his military service, Jackson had encountered enough intelligence officers to recognize certain patterns: the careful balance of gratitude and authority, the immediate request for communication, the lack of surprise at having no identification. "Well, Daniel, I'm Jackson Reed. You're welcome to the key, but I'm afraid phones are a problem. Landlines are down, and there's no cell service. We're pretty much snowed in until the county plows make it out this way, which could be a while." Jackson handed over the key, but maintained a cautious distance. "There's coffee and oatmeal in the kitchen if you're up for it." As Daniel slowly sat up, wincing slightly from what were likely bruised ribs from the impact, Jackson noticed him taking inventory of his surroundings with practiced efficiency, noting exits, windows, potential weapons, exactly as Jackson had been trained to do in uncertain situations during his military days. "Military?" Jackson asked casually, pouring 2 cups of coffee, a slight hesitation. "Former Marine Corps. You have a good eye." "Army, 10th Mountain Division," Jackson replied. "Did 2 tours before coming back to take over the family farm when my father got sick." He gestured around the modest farmhouse. "Not exactly the career I planned, but family comes first." Something in Daniel's expression shifted at this, a momentary softening that seemed genuine amid the careful control. "Semper fi to that," he said quietly, accepting the offered coffee. As they ate breakfast in what might have appeared to an observer as casual conversation, Jackson recognized they were engaged in a delicate dance, Daniel providing just enough information to seem cooperative while revealing nothing of substance, Jackson asking just enough questions to signal he wasn't entirely buying the story, but wasn't hostile either. Daniel claimed to be a security consultant traveling to meet a client when the storm caught him by surprise. The lack of identification he explained as a robbery at a rest stop 2 days earlier, wallet and phone taken, but the thieves had overlooked the key in his inner pocket. "Valuable key?" Jackson asked, noting how Daniel had immediately secured. "It in a pocket out of sight. Just sentimental," came the practiced response. "Family heirloom. Doesn't even open anything anymore." The conversation might have continued in this careful pattern indefinitely had fate not intervened in the form of a loud mechanical noise outside, the unmistakable sound of helicopter rotors approaching through the crystal-clear post-storm sky. Max began barking excitedly, rushing to the window where, sure enough, a black helicopter was descending toward the open field beyond Jackson's barn. More telling than the helicopter itself was Daniel's reaction, a complex mixture of relief and what appeared to be resignation, as if a chapter was closing. "Looks like your ride is here," Jackson observed dryly. "Must be some security consulting firm to send a helicopter for their missing employee during a state emergency." Daniel met his gaze directly for the first time. "Jackson, I owe you my life, and I won't insult your intelligence with more fabrications. That helicopter isn't from my company. It's likely a government search and rescue operation." "Must be nice to rate that kind of priority," Jackson replied, watching as 4 figures in tactical winter gear emerged from the helicopter, moving with the unmistakable precision of special operations personnel. "I need to ask for your discretion about a few things," Daniel continued urgently, as the figures began making their way toward the farmhouse. "The key, for instance. It would be better if you didn't mention finding it." "And why would I do that?" Jackson asked, standing by the window with his arms crossed. Daniel sighed, a decision visibly forming behind his eyes. "Because I'm not actually a security consultant, and that's not actually a search and rescue team. What happens in the next few minutes will depend largely on what you tell them." Before Jackson could respond, a firm knock came at the door. Max's barking intensified, and Jackson felt the situation shifting into territory far beyond the simple rescue of a stranded motorist. "Mr. Reed, this is Special Agent Lauren Carter, Department of Homeland Security. We need to speak with you immediately." Jackson glanced at Daniel, who had straightened his posture despite his injuries, all pretense of civilian casualness gone. "Your call, Sergeant Reed," he said quietly, "but whatever you decide, I'm genuinely grateful for what you did last night." With a deep breath, Jackson opened the door to find 4 figures in winter tactical gear, the leader a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, who immediately presented credentials identifying her as DHS. "Mr. Reed, we understand you may have assisted a motorist during last night's storm," she stated, her tone professional but with unmistakable urgency. "We need to debrief you and ensure everything is secure." "Everything's secure here, Agent Carter," Jackson replied carefully. "Just helped a guy whose car went off the road. He's right inside if you want to talk to him." The agents exchanged glances that confirmed Jackson's growing suspicion. This was no ordinary stranded motorist, and this was no ordinary welfare check. "May we come in?" Agent Carter asked, though her tone made it clear this was more protocol than actual request. As Jackson stepped aside to allow them entry, one agent immediately moved to secure the perimeter, while another established communications with the helicopter. Agent Carter and the 4th agent approached Daniel with a mixture of relief and professionally contained urgency. "Director Castillo." "Thank God," Agent Carter said quietly. "POTUS has been extremely concerned. Are you injured?" "Director, not Daniel." "And POTUS, President of the United States." Jackson felt the ground shift beneath his understanding of the situation. His mysterious guest wasn't just some government agent, but someone important enough for the president to take personal interest in his welfare. "Minor concussion, possibly bruised ribs," the man replied, all pretense gone as he shifted fully into his actual identity. "Mr. Reed here provided emergency assistance and shelter during the storm. He's a veteran, 10th Mountain Division." Agent Carter turned to Jackson with a reassessing gaze. "Mr. Reed, we appreciate your assistance in this matter. However, I need to inform you that you've been involved in a situation with significant national security implications. We'll need you to sign some confidentiality agreements and debrief with our team." Jackson glanced around his modest farmhouse, now suddenly filled with Homeland Security agents attending to a man important enough to warrant presidential concern. The simple act of helping a stranded motorist had somehow catapulted him into a world far removed from his struggling farm and impending foreclosure. "I'm happy to cooperate," Jackson said carefully, "but I'd like to understand exactly what's happening in my home." Director Castillo exchanged glances with Agent Carter before making what appeared to be a significant decision. "Mr. Reed deserves some explanation, given the circumstances. Clear the room, please." As the other agents withdrew to secure positions, outside, Director Castillo turned to Jackson with an expression of genuine respect. "Mr. Reed, what I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest levels. I am indeed Marcus Castillo, Director of the Presidential Protection Division, a specialized unit within the Secret Service that few people know exists. The key you found is a secure access device for emergency protocols related to presidential continuity of government operations." The weight of this revelation hung in the air between them. Jackson Reed, struggling farmer on the verge of foreclosure, had unwittingly rescued one of the most important security officials in the United States government, and now possessed knowledge that placed him in an entirely unexpected position. What Jackson couldn't possibly know as he processed this extraordinary revelation was that this chance encounter during a blizzard would lead to an opportunity that would not only save his family farm, but draw him into a world of national security that would transform his life in ways he could never have imagined. The farmhouse kitchen had become an impromptu command center. Agent Carter had established secure communications with Washington, while two other agents carefully examined Director Castillo's injuries. Jackson Reed sat at his grandfather's oak table, still processing the revelation that his rescue of a stranded motorist had plunged him directly into matters of national security. The storm was actually fortunate, Director Castillo explained, wincing slightly as a medic examined his ribs. It prevented anyone else from finding me before your people did. Anyone else? Jackson asked, picking up on the implication. Director. Castillo exchanged glances with Agent Carter before responding. My accident wasn't entirely accidental. My vehicle was forced off the road approximately half a mile before the point where you found me. You were attacked. Jackson's military instincts immediately heightened, and he found himself moving to check the windows, a habit from his combat days that had never entirely faded. We believe so, Agent Carter confirmed, looking up from her secure tablet. Satellite. Imagery captured a second vehicle, leaving the scene shortly after Director Castillo's car went off the road. The blizzard prevented them from confirming whether their objective was completed. The implications hung heavily in the room. Had Jackson not come along when he did, had he chosen to drive past, like most people would have during a dangerous storm, Director Castillo might have frozen to death, or worse, been found by whoever had forced him off the road. So I stumbled into an assassination attempt, Jackson said quietly, scratching Max behind the ears as the dog remained vigilantly by his side. We don't use that terminology without confirmation, Agent Carter replied diplomatically, but your intervention was extraordinarily timely. Director Castillo dismissed the medic with a nod and turned his full attention to Jackson. Mr. Reed, your service record indicates someone with exceptional situational awareness and decision-making abilities under pressure. Last night proved those qualities remain intact. Tell me, what made you stop when most would have continued driving? The question caught Jackson off guard. He'd been expecting interrogation about what he might have seen or heard, not an inquiry into his motivations. Honestly, I'm not sure, he admitted after a moment's consideration. Something didn't look right about those tracks, too fresh in the worsening storm. And I guess, well, living out here, we look out for each other. City folks don't always understand that. The director nodded thoughtfully. Community responsibility, a value that seems increasingly rare. He glanced around the modest farmhouse with its worn furniture and the carefully maintained but outdated equipment. Agent Carter mentioned you're a third-generation farmer. The property's been in your family since the 1950s? Yes, sir. My grandfather, who bought it after coming home from World War II. My father expanded it in the 70s, and I took over after my military service when his health failed. Jackson paused, the financial reality of his situation momentarily overshadowing even these extraordinary circumstances. Though, to be honest, I'm not sure how much longer I'll be able to hold on to it. 3 bad seasons in a row have put me underwater, with the bank. If Jackson expected sympathy, what he received instead was intensified interest. Director Castillo straightened, exchanging a significant look with Agent Carter. This property is approximately 20 miles from Interstate 70, accessible only by County Road CR 117, with natural elevation features providing visibility of approaching vehicles for nearly 2 miles in all directions, the director noted with surprising precision. And you maintain equipment for managing in extreme weather conditions. Have to out here, Jackson confirmed, puzzled by this line of questioning. Got the tractor with snowplow attachments, generator backup, satellite communications when they're working good well water independent of county lines. And your nearest neighbor, Peterson's, about 4 miles east. Then the Williams place 7 miles west. Not exactly a crowded neighborhood. Director Castillo nodded as if confirming something. To himself, Mr. Reed, your assistance last night may have prevented a significant national security incident. While I can't discuss the specific nature of my travel or the information contained in the secure key you recovered, I can tell you that my role involves maintaining certain continuity of government protocols that few people are aware exist. The formal language didn't mask what Jackson was beginning to understand. He had rescued someone involved with preserving the functioning of government during emergencies, someone important enough that unknown adversaries had attempted to eliminate him on a remote country road during a historic blizzard. In light of your service and the unique circumstances of our meeting, Director Castillo continued, I'd like to propose something unconventional. The Presidential Protection Division maintains a network of secure locations throughout the country, properties that meet specific geographical and logistical criteria, owned by vetted individuals who provide certain services when needed. Agent Carter looked up sharply, clearly surprised by whatever the director was suggesting. Sir, standard protocols require extensive background. I'm well aware of standard protocols, Agent Carter, Castillo interrupted with the quiet authority of someone accustomed to making exceptional decisions. But I'm also aware that Mr. Reed has already demonstrated trustworthiness under extraordinary circumstances, has relevant military training, and possesses a property with strategic advantages. Sometimes fate provides opportunities that bureaucracy would overlook. He turned back to Jackson. Simply put, Mr. Reed, we occasionally need secure properties where certain government personnel can be temporarily housed during emergencies or sensitive operations. Owners of such properties are compensated generously for maintaining specific security standards and absolute discretion. Jackson studied the director's expression, looking for the catch. You're offering to pay me to... What? Keep a room available for government agents who might never show up? It's somewhat more involved than that, Director Castillo acknowledged. There would be certain modifications to your property, security systems, communications equipment, possibly some structural reinforcements. You would receive training in basic protocols, but essentially, yes, you would be compensated for maintaining this property as a potential safe location, with significant bonuses when it's actually utilized, which might be never, Jackson noted skeptically, or might be frequently, given your strategically advantageous location between 3 major metropolitan areas, Castillo countered. The compensation package is substantial, Mr. Reed, likely enough to resolve your current financial difficulties and ensure the farm remains in your family for another generation. The offer hung in the air between them, unexpected, almost unbelievable, yet tantalizing in its potential to solve the financial crisis that had been consuming Jackson's life. Before he could respond, Agent Carter's secure tablet chimed with an incoming message. Sir, we have confirmation of the second vehicle. Local sheriff found it abandoned at a truck stop 50 miles south. Forensics team is en route, but preliminary. Reports indicate at least 2 individuals were involved. Director Castillo nodded grimly. They'll have gone to ground now that the operation failed, but ensure all regional law enforcement has the profile indicators. He turned back to Jackson. I apologize for conducting business in your home, Mr. Reed, but circumstances necessitate efficiency. Jackson waved off the apology, his mind still processing the extraordinary offer that had just been presented. This safe house network, is it something new because of what happened to you? No, Castillo replied, his expression carefully neutral. The network has existed in various forms for decades. What happened last night simply highlighted a gap in our coverage in this region. A gap your property could ideally fill. There was something in the director's tone that suggested he wasn't revealing everything. But before Jackson could press further, one of the agents by the window tensed visibly. "Movement at the eastern perimeter," she reported crisply. "Single. Vehicle approaching slowly. County markings, possibly local sheriff." Agent Carter moved immediately to the window, scanning the approaching vehicle through specialized binoculars. "Confirmed Sheriff's Department SUV, single occupant, no alert indicators." The tension in the room eased marginally, but Jackson noted that one agent had discreetly positioned himself where he could monitor the approaching vehicle while maintaining cover. These weren't people who left security to chance, even when dealing with local law enforcement. "Mr. Reed, we'll need to establish a consistent narrative for any inquiries about last night," Director Castillo said quietly. "The simplest approach is often best. You found a stranded federal employee during the storm, provided emergency assistance, and we're now arranging transportation back to his office. No need to mention the accident specifics or my particular role. The implication was clear. They were asking Jackson to participate in a controlled deception, even if only by omission. 24 hours ago, such a request might have troubled him deeply. Now, having glimpsed the world these people operated in, he found himself nodding in agreement. "Sheriff Daniels is a good man," Jackson offered. "Known him since high school. He's not the suspicious type." "Nevertheless, we'll handle the interaction," Agent Carter stated firmly. "Director, you should remain out of sight until we've established the situation." As the agents prepared for the sheriff's arrival, Director Castillo took advantage of the momentary privacy to address Jackson directly, his voice lowered. "Mr. Reed, regardless of your decision about my offer, I want you to understand something. What you did last night, stopping to help a stranger during a dangerous storm, speaks to character qualities that are increasingly rare and valuable. The decision likely saved my life, but more importantly, it protected critical national security information from falling into hostile hands." The sincerity in the director's voice was unmistakable, and Jackson found himself responding to the man rather than his position. "Anyone would have done the same," he offered, though both knew that wasn't true. "No, they wouldn't have," Castillo replied with absolute certainty, "and that's precisely why I'm making this highly irregular offer. Sometimes the most effective security assets aren't those created by the system, but those who demonstrate the right instincts naturally." The sheriff's vehicle had stopped in the farmyard, and Agent Carter was already moving toward the door to intercept him. Director Castillo handed Jackson a plain business card with only a phone number printed on it. "Take 48 hours to consider the offer," he said. "This number will connect you directly to my office. If you accept, we can begin the process immediately. If not, this conversation never happened." As Agent Carter greeted Sheriff Daniels at the door with practiced ease, Jackson pocketed the card, aware that the simple rectangle of paper represented a potential turning point in his life. An unexpected opportunity arising from a split-second decision to stop on a snowy road during the worst blizzard in 50 years. What Jackson Reed couldn't possibly know as he prepared to greet his old high school acquaintance was that Director Castillo's interest in his property went far beyond its potential as a safe house. Deep in classified government archives, a file nearly 30 years old contained photographs of Jackson's grandfather standing beside a much younger version of the current President of the United States. Both men wearing expressions suggesting they shared secrets that had never been recorded in any official history. Sheriff Mike Daniels had known Jackson Reed since they played high school football together 25 years earlier. They'd taken different paths, Mike to law enforcement after community college, Jackson to the army, and then back to his family farm, but maintained the casual familiarity of men who had grown up in the same small community. "Quite the storm. Huh, Jack?" the sheriff commented as he stomped snow from his boots in the farmhouse entryway. His eyes registered the presence of the government agents with professional curiosity, but no immediate alarm. In rural areas, federal authorities occasionally appeared for agricultural inspections or environmental surveys. Record breaker, Jackson agreed, playing his part in the carefully constructed narrative. Found this gentleman's car in a ditch near Miller's Creek last night. Couldn't get through to emergency services, so brought him here to wait out the storm. Agent Carter smoothly inserted herself into the conversation. Special Agent Lauren Carter, Department of Homeland Security. She introduced herself, presenting credentials that the sheriff examined with appropriate respect. We appreciate Mr. Reed's assistance with our colleague. We've arranged extraction and wanted to check if the county needed any support with storm response while our assets are in the area. It was a masterful deflection, shifting the sheriff's attention from questions about why federal agents were at a local farm to an offer of assistance that no rural sheriff would decline after a historic blizzard. That's mighty generous, Sheriff Daniels replied, visibly shifting mental gears. We've got 3 families still unaccounted for out near the western ridge. Our snowmobiles can't make it through some of the deeper drifts. I'll coordinate with our helicopter team, Agent Carter assured him. If you can provide the coordinates, we'd be happy to assist. As the sheriff and Agent Carter moved to the kitchen table to mark locations on a county map, Jackson found himself standing beside Director Castillo, who had emerged from the adjacent room but maintained a low profile, allowing Agent Carter to manage the interaction. You run a tight operation, Jackson observed quietly. Necessity, Castillo replied simply. Agent Carter was Secret Service before joining my division. She has a particular talent for redirecting attention. The casual reference to the Secret Service reminded Jackson of exactly who he was dealing with. Not just any government official, but someone directly connected to presidential security. Someone important enough that his safety warranted immediate high-level response. After the sheriff departed, promised aerial support for his search and rescue efforts, the atmosphere in the farmhouse shifted. The tactical team began preparing for departure, gathering equipment and securing communications. We'll be transported to a secondary location before returning to Washington, Director Castillo explained, as he carefully put on his coat, movements measured to accommodate his injured ribs. Standard protocol when there's been a security incident. Jackson nodded, understanding the logic while still finding it surreal that such high-level security protocols were playing out in his modest farmhouse. And your attackers will be pursued through appropriate channels, Castillo replied with careful neutrality that revealed nothing while suggesting much. You don't need to be concerned about potential retaliation. As far as any hostile actors are concerned, I was rescued by an anonymous emergency response team. Agent Carter approached with a tablet, displaying a digital document. Mr. Reed, this is a standard non-disclosure agreement covering your interaction with Director Castillo and knowledge of our operations. Essentially, you agree not to discuss today's events with anyone. Jackson took the tablet, scanning the dense legal language. Pretty serious penalties listed here. National security requires discretion, she replied evenly, though the director has expressed his personal confidence in your reliability. After a moment's consideration, Jackson signed the document with his fingertip on the screen. Whatever he had stumbled into by rescuing a stranded motorist, he had no intention of broadcasting it to the world. The director's offer remains open. For 48 hours, Agent Carter added, taking back the tablet. Should you decide to accept, the process would begin immediately. As the team prepared for final departure, Director Castillo approached Jackson once more. Walk with me to the helicopter if you would, he requested, his tone making it clear this wasn't merely a courtesy. Outside, the winter landscape sparkled under clear blue skies, the storm's fury replaced by pristine beauty that belied its destructive power. They walked slowly, Castillo's injuries necessitating a measured pace. "Your grandfather was Thomas Reed, correct?" the director asked once they were beyond earshot of the others. The question caught Jackson by surprise. "Yes, he passed about 15 years ago. Why?" Castillo seemed to be weighing his words carefully. Did he ever mention his work during the Cold War, after his military service but before he focused entirely on farming? Jackson frowned, memories stirring of childhood conversations with a grandfather who had always seemed to know more than he shared. He mentioned consulting for the government occasionally, agricultural development projects, he called them. My grandmother used to joke about his mysterious business trips. Castillo nodded, as if this confirmed something. "Mr. Reed, there's another reason I'm interested in your property beyond its strategic location. Your grandfather was part of a highly classified program, codenamed Sentinel, during the 1960s and 70s. The program established a network of secure locations outside traditional government channels, places known only to a select few, maintained by civilians with specific backgrounds. The revelation landed heavily, connecting stray pieces of Jackson's childhood memories, his grandfather's occasional unexplained absences, the secure room in the basement that was always kept locked, the unusual visitors who sometimes arrived late at night for hushed conversations. The Sentinel network was officially decommissioned in 1987, Castillo continued, watching Jackson's reaction carefully. Most locations were removed from active service, their owners compensated for their discretion, but a few properties maintained certain structural elements that were never fully deactivated. Structural elements, Jackson repeated, his mind racing to interpret the deliberately vague terminology. "Mr. Reed, have you ever accessed the lower level of your northeast barn, the area beneath the equipment storage room?" The question sent a jolt through Jackson. The northeast barn contained a locked door his father had explicitly forbidden him from attempting to open, stating simply that it contained dangerous old farm equipment that his grandfather had stored away. After inheriting the property, Jackson had respected the long-standing prohibition out of habit, focusing his efforts on the actively used portions of the farm. "No," he admitted. "Dad always said it was just storage. Nothing worth bothering with." Castillo's expression revealed nothing, but his continued interest spoke volumes. "The offer I extended earlier was genuine, but incomplete. We're not just interested in establishing your property as a safe location. We believe it may already contain infrastructure from the original Sentinel program that could be reactivated, saving considerable resources compared to building from scratch." They had reached the helicopter, its rotors beginning their pre-flight sequence. Director Castillo handed Jackson a second item, not a business card this time, but a small metallic object that resembled an ordinary flash drive. "This contains specialized scanning software. If you decide to explore the northeast barn, this will help you identify any Sentinel infrastructure that remains active. The non-disclosure agreement you signed covers anything you might discover." He paused, then added with unexpected frankness, "Your grandfather served his country in ways that never appeared in any official record, Mr. Reed. The decision to continue, that legacy is entirely yours, but I believe he would be proud to see the next generation take up that mantle." With a final handshake, Director Castillo boarded the helicopter. Minutes later, the aircraft rose into the crystal-clear sky, banked sharply, and disappeared over the eastern horizon, leaving Jackson Reed standing alone in the snow-covered field, a small metal device in his hand, and questions multiplying in his mind. The farmhouse felt strangely empty after the departure of the government team. Max settled back into his usual spot by the fireplace while Jackson made a fresh pot of coffee, mind reeling from the day's revelations. His simple act of compassion during a blizzard had somehow connected him to classified government programs, presidential security protocols, and now, apparently, a secret legacy left by his grandfather. The flash drive Castillo had given him sat on the kitchen table, innocuous yet somehow radiating importance. Jackson's laptop was 5 years old, purchased when grain prices had briefly spiked enough to justify the expense. He powered it up, inserted the drive, and watched as a single application appeared. No labels, just a minimalist interface requesting authorization. When he touched the screen, the device in his hand vibrated slightly and the program immediately authorized, suggesting it contained some form of proximity verification. A simple map appeared, showing the layout of his property with a pulsing indicator highlighting the northeast barn. "What the hell were you involved in, Grandpa?" Jackson murmured, staring at the screen. The northeast barn was the oldest structure on the property, predating even his grandfather's ownership. Unlike the main barn, which had been rebuilt in the 1970s with modern materials, the northeast outbuilding maintained its original stone foundation and heavy timber construction, modified only with essential repairs over the decades. Jackson pulled on his winter gear once more and made his way through the snow to the indicated building. The massive drifts had partially blocked the main door, requiring considerable effort to force it open. Inside, farm equipment accumulated over 3 generations filled most of the available space. His grandfather's first tractor now serving as a platform for storage boxes, antique implements hanging from well-worn hooks, the practical archaeology of a family farm. The equipment storage room Castillo had mentioned was accessed through a heavy door at the back of the barn. Jackson had been inside many times over the years, retrieving rarely used tools or parts. Nothing about it had ever struck him as unusual. With the scanning program running on his phone now, he entered the familiar space and waited. For nearly a minute, nothing happened. Then, as he moved toward the far corner, the device began to emit a soft, pulsing tone, its display showing a heat map overlay that intensified as he approached what appeared to be a solid concrete wall. Upon closer inspection, Jackson noticed subtle inconsistencies in the aging concrete. Lines too straight to be random cracks, corners too precise to be the result of natural settling. Following the scanner's guidance, he pressed his palm against a specific section of wall that appeared identical to the surrounding surface. Nothing happened. Just as disappointment began to set in, the scanner displayed a new message. Legacy. Authentication required. Jackson remembered Director Castillo's words about structural elements that were never fully deactivated, and his pointed question about whether Jackson had ever accessed the lower level. Clearly, there was an access mechanism here, but it required something he didn't have, or did he? Jackson's thoughts turned to his grandfather's study in the farmhouse, preserved largely as it had been during his lifetime, a small room lined with agricultural references, family photographs, and mementos from a life spent balancing farming with what were apparently classified government activities. What Jackson Reed couldn't know as he hurried back toward the farmhouse, determined to search for whatever legacy authentication might mean, was that 20 miles away, in the abandoned truck stop where Sheriff Daniels had found the vehicle involved in Director Castillo's accident, a sophisticated listening device was transmitting everything the sheriff reported back to individuals whose interest in the director, and now potentially in Jackson Reed's farm, represented a threat that had been evolving in the shadows for nearly 3 decades. Jackson Reed's grandfather's study remained largely untouched since Thomas Reed's passing 15 years earlier. Jackson's father had maintained it as a kind of memorial, and after his own death, Jackson had preserved the tradition. The small room contained a lifetime of memories, agricultural awards, family photographs, military honors, and the personal. Effects of a man who had clearly lived a more complex life than his grandson had ever realized. Legacy authentication, Jackson murmured, surveying the room with fresh eyes. What would constitute authentication for a decades-old secret government facility? A key? A code? Some form of identification that would have been important enough for his grandfather to keep but ordinary-looking enough to avoid drawing attention. He began a methodical search, starting with the heavy oak desk that dominated the room. The drawers contained the expected items: old correspondence, farming records, maintenance logs for equipment long since replaced. Nothing that suggested connections to classified government programs. The bookshelf yielded similarly mundane results: agricultural references, wildlife identification guides, family Bibles recording births and deaths across generations. Jackson ran his fingers along the spines, looking for anything that seemed out of place among a farmer's typical collection. "Come on, Grandpa," he muttered in frustration. "If you left something behind, where would you hide it?" His gaze fell on a framed photograph he'd seen countless times. His grandfather standing beside his prized John Deere tractor, the first major piece of equipment he'd purchased after a particularly successful harvest in 1972. Something about the image nagged at Jackson's memory, something his grandfather had once said about that tractor. "The key to our success," Thomas Reed had often remarked with a wink when showing the photograph to visitors. As a child, Jackson had taken the statement literally. The new tractor had, indeed, expanded their production capacity. Now, he wondered if there had been a second meaning hiding in plain sight all these years. Jackson carefully removed the photograph from the wall and examined the frame. It appeared ordinary, if somewhat heavier than necessary for its size. When he turned it over, the backing seemed perfectly normal as well, until he noticed almost imperceptible indentations at each corner, as if designed for a specific pressure pattern. Following instinct, Jackson pressed all four corners simultaneously. With a soft click, the seemingly solid backing separated, revealing a hidden compartment containing a small metal case. Inside the case, nestled in custom-fitted foam, lay what appeared to be an ordinary pocket watch, the kind his grandfather had carried daily. Jackson had assumed it had been buried with him. The gold cover bore the Reed family crest, a custom edition his grandfather had commissioned during more prosperous times. "This is it?" Jackson wondered aloud, turning the watch over in his hands. It seemed disappointingly mundane for something, hidden so carefully. On closer inspection, however, several unusual features became apparent. The watch was significantly heavier than it should have been. The winding mechanism had subtle notches that didn't match any standard watch design. Most tellingly, the face contained an unusual secondary dial with markings that didn't correspond to any timekeeping function. Taking the watch and his phone with the scanning program still active, Jackson returned to the northeast barn. The winter afternoon was already fading toward dusk, casting long shadows across the snow-covered landscape. Inside the equipment storage room, the scanner once again led him to the suspicious section of concrete wall. This time, Jackson examined the surface more carefully, running his fingers along the almost imperceptible seams his eyes had missed before. Near waist height, he found a small depression that might accommodate the watch. "Legacy authentication," he murmured, placing the pocket watch into the shallow recess. It fit perfectly, but nothing happened. The scanner displayed a new message: "Authentication sequence required." Jackson studied the watch face, noting the unusual secondary dial. Acting on intuition, he pressed the winding crown, causing the secondary dial to activate. Following the pattern of his grandfather's birth year, 1927, he rotated the dial accordingly. With a sound like pressurized air releasing, a section of the concrete wall recessed and then slid sideways, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. "Holy shit," Jackson breathed, momentarily frozen in place. The scanner in his hand beeped, displaying a simple message: Sentinel access confirmed. Proceeding with system reactivation. Lights flickered to life along the stairwell, seemingly responding to the scanner's signal. The system had been dormant, but not dead, waiting all these years for proper authentication. With Max following cautiously behind him, Jackson descended the stairs, counting 27 steps before reaching a small landing with a heavy metal door. Unlike the aging barn above, this infrastructure showed remarkable preservation, built to last decades without maintenance. The door opened automatically as he approached, revealing a chamber that instantly transported Jackson back to Cold War imagery he'd seen in military museums. Banks of equipment lined the walls: communication systems, monitoring stations, and technology that represented the pinnacle of security systems from the 1970s, integrated with what appeared to be more modern components added in later decades. "Grandpa, what were you involved in?" Jackson whispered, moving slowly through the underground facility. The main room led to several smaller chambers, a basic medical area, sleeping quarters with 4 bunks, a storage room containing preserved rations and supplies, and most surprisingly, an armory with secured weapons cabinets that his scanner indicated remained locked under higher-level authorization protocols. On the central desk, a yellowed envelope bore a single word in his grandfather's distinctive handwriting: "Successor." With hands that trembled slightly from the weight of discovery, Jackson opened the envelope and unfolded a letter dated June 17th, 1985. To whoever finds this facility. If you're reading this, you've either been authorized by Sentinel Command or your family, who's discovered what I've kept hidden for nearly 3 decades. If it's the latter, I owe you an explanation. In 1957, I was recruited into a program called Sentinel, not as a spy or soldier, but as a keeper of safe ground. Our nation's leaders recognized that official government facilities would be primary targets in case of nuclear exchange or other catastrophic events. They needed backup locations known to only a select few, maintained by civilians whose profiles wouldn't attract attention. Our farm was selected for its strategic location, far enough from major targets to survive initial attacks, yet accessible from multiple evacuation routes from the capital. Beneath this ordinary barn, they built an extraordinary facility, a hardened bunker designed to house key government personnel during emergency transitions of power. I maintained this facility for 28 years, hosting 6 presidential-level exercises and 2 actual emergency evacuations that never appeared in any public record. In 1985, when the program was officially decommissioned, I was instructed to seal this facility but not dismantle it, a precaution that seemed excessive then, but perhaps has proven wise if you're reading this now. The Authentication Watch contains codes known only to me and Sentinel Command. If government representatives have directed you here, they likely have protocol documentation. If you've discovered this on your own, proceed with extreme caution. Knowledge of this facility places you in a position both privileged and potentially dangerous. Whatever circumstances have led to the reopening of this site, know that its purpose was always to preserve our nation's constitutional governance during existential threats. Use it accordingly, with duty and honor. Thomas Reed. Sentinel Keeper, Site 1-17. Jackson sat heavily in the desk chair, the letter trembling slightly in his hands. His grandfather, the man who had taught him to fish, to farm, to respect the land, had simultaneously been serving as guardian of a classified government evacuation facility, potentially hosting presidents or their designees during national emergencies. The scanner on the desk chimed softly, displaying a new message. Initial systems check complete. Sentinel Site 117 at 42% operational capacity, awaiting full reactivation authorization. Before Jackson could process this information, another alert appeared. Incoming communication on Sentinel Secure Channel. Accept? Heart pounding. Jackson tapped accept, and Director Castillo's voice emerged from a speaker system that had sat dormant for decades. Mr. Reed, I see you've found your grandfather's legacy. Our monitoring systems indicated the site reactivation. Are you alone? Yes, Jackson replied, the surrealism of speaking to a government director through Cold War-era communication equipment not lost on him. Just me and my dog. I found my grandfather's letter about being a sentinel keeper. What exactly does that mean for me? It means you have a choice to make, Castillo replied, his tone serious but not pressuring. The Sentinel program never truly ended, Mr. Reed. It evolved. The original network included 47 sites across the country, each designed to support continuity of government during catastrophic events. Over time, most were decommissioned or converted to other uses as technology changed and new facilities were built. But not this one, Jackson noted, looking around at the remarkably preserved underground bunker. No, not Site 117. Your grandfather's facility was among a handful designated for preservation due to its strategic location and unique features. According to our records, it contains something that made it particularly valuable, something called the archive. Jackson scanned the room, seeing nothing that matched such a significant-sounding designation. I don't see anything like that. Just communications equipment, living quarters, and some locked cabinets. The archive wouldn't be immediately visible, Castillo explained. For security reasons, it required separate authentication, likely something personal to your grandfather that wouldn't appear in official documentation. The implication was clear. Whatever this archive contained, it was significant enough that even those who knew about the Sentinel program weren't privy to its access protocols. Only Thomas Reed had held that information, apparently taking it to his grave, unless he had left clues for his descendants. Director, Jackson said slowly, why are you telling me all this? What's happening that made finding this place suddenly important after all these years? A pause stretched over the communication system before Castillo responded. 3 days ago, someone attempted to access the dormant Sentinel network through obsolete channels that should have been deactivated decades ago. Yesterday, my vehicle was forced off the road after I collected hard copy records related to Site 117 from a secure archive facility. These are not coincidences, Mr. Reed. You think someone is looking for whatever's in my grandfather's bunker, Jackson concluded. The archive, whatever that is. Yes, and the fact that they're willing to target someone of my position suggests they have both resources and determination, which means you may be in danger as well, as the property owner and Thomas Reed's grandson. The weight of this statement settled heavily on Jackson. His simple act of compassion during a blizzard had not only revealed his grandfather's secret legacy, but potentially placed him in the crosshairs of unknown adversaries. What do you want me to do? He asked finally. For now, secure the facility and return to your house. We're dispatching a protection team that should arrive within the hour. I'm also expediting the paperwork for your formal integration into the current iteration of the Sentinel program, which includes significant security, upgrades to your property, and financial compensation that should resolve your issues with the bank. The practical concerns that had dominated Jackson's life just days ago, the impending foreclosure, the struggle to maintain the family farm, now seemed almost trivial compared to secret bunkers and mysterious archives. Yet Castillo had made a point of addressing those concerns, recognizing their importance to Jackson despite the larger security implications at play. And the archive, Jackson asked. "If you can locate it before our team arrives, secure it but do not attempt to access its contents without proper protocols. If not, our specialists can assist with non-invasive scanning techniques that might identify its location." As Jackson prepared to follow these instructions, securing the bunker and returning to the farmhouse, he noticed something he had overlooked during his initial exploration: a photograph tucked into the frame of a technical diagram on the wall. It showed his grandfather standing with 3 other men against a mountain backdrop, all smiling in hiking gear that suggested a casual outing rather than government business. Yet something about one of the men caught Jackson's attention. A familiar face, much younger than he had ever seen it in person, but unmistakable nonetheless. The current president of the United States decades ago, arm in arm with Thomas Reed on what appeared to be a simple fishing trip among friends. What Jackson Reed couldn't know, as he stared at this photograph, connecting pieces of a puzzle whose scope he was only beginning to comprehend, was that the archive hidden somewhere on his property contained information that could reshape public understanding of presidential history for the past 30 years, and that the protection team Castillo mentioned was racing against others who had already triangulated the Sentinel activation signal and were now less than 20 minutes from the farm's perimeter. The winter sun had set by the time Jackson Reed returned to his farmhouse, casting the snow-covered landscape into blue twilight, broken only by security lights. Illuminating the yard, the photograph from the bunker was tucked securely in his jacket pocket, tangible evidence of a connection between his grandfather and the current president that he was still struggling to comprehend. Max trotted alongside him, the dog's senses more alert than usual, as if he too understood that their familiar surroundings had transformed into something more complex and potentially dangerous. Jackson found himself scanning the tree line at the property's edge, suddenly aware of how exposed the half-mile walk from the barn to the house made him. Inside the farmhouse, Jackson secured all doors and windows, a precaution that would have seemed paranoid just days ago, but now felt woefully inadequate given Castillo's warnings. The protection team was reportedly en route, but until they arrived, he was alone with knowledge that apparently made him a target. As he filled Max's water bowl, his gaze fell on the kitchen wall where generations of Reed family photographs chronicled the farm's history. Among them was a picture taken on his 12th birthday, himself grinning with a missing front tooth, proudly holding a fishing rod beside his grandfather at Miller's Creek, the same creek where he'd found Director Castillo's vehicle. Something about the image triggered a connection in his mind. His grandfather had given him a special gift that birthday, a tackle box he'd claimed contained everything a man needs to find what others can't see. Jackson had used it for years, before relegating it to the attic when more sophisticated fishing equipment replaced the simple tools of his childhood, the tackle box. There had always been a compartment in it that remained locked, which his grandfather had explained contained special lures too valuable for a boy to risk losing. As an adult, Jackson had assumed it probably held expensive fishing equipment or perhaps sentimental items. Now, he wondered if it might contain something entirely different. Moving quickly to the attic access in the hallway, Jackson pulled down the folding stairs and climbed into the dusty space where generations of Reed family possessions were carefully stored. The tackle box was exactly where he remembered, tucked beside camping equipment that hadn't been used in years. The metal container showed its age, rust forming at the corners, the once bright blue paint faded to a dull patina. The main compartments opened easily, revealing basic fishing supplies now brittle with age. The locked section, a small compartment at the bottom, remained secured by a simple padlock whose key had never been provided. Returning to the kitchen, Jackson examined the pocket watch that had opened the bunker entrance. It seemed too large to serve as a key for the tackle box's small lock, but on closer inspection he noticed the watch fob, an ornamental chain his grandfather had always kept attached, ended in an unusual configuration that might serve as a key. The fob slid perfectly into the padlock, which opened with a soft click that seemed disproportionately significant given the circumstances. Inside the compartment lay not fishing equipment, but a small leather-bound journal, and what appeared to be a data storage device, though of a design Jackson had never seen before, clearly military-grade and built for extreme durability. The journal's first page contained a single sentence in his grandfather's handwriting, "For my grandson, when the time comes." The remaining pages detailed operational protocols for something called Presidential Continuity Documentation, procedures for recording and preserving executive decisions made during emergency situations when normal White House documentation. Systems might be compromised. Jackson's hands trembled slightly as he realized what he was holding. The archive wasn't a location, but an object. This data device containing records of presidential decisions made during crises serious enough to activate the Sentinel network, records that existed nowhere in official government systems. Before he could examine it further, Max's ears perked up, the dog moving quickly to the front window with a low growl building in his throat. Outside, Jackson could see headlights approaching along the private access road that led to his property. Not from the main highway where Castillo's protection team would likely arrive, but from the rarely used Forestry Service road that bordered his western acreage. Someone was attempting to approach undetected. Heart pounding, Jackson quickly returned the journal and data device to the tackle box and moved it to his grandfather's gun cabinet. Retrieving his shotgun, a practical necessity for rural life rather than a tactical choice, he positioned himself where he could monitor the approaching vehicle while maintaining cover. The headlights cut through the darkness, revealing an unmarked black SUV moving slowly but purposefully toward the farmhouse. It stopped at the edge of the illuminated yard, remaining just outside the circle of security lighting, a tactical positioning that confirmed these were not friendly visitors. Jackson's satellite phone buzzed with an incoming message from a blocked number. Protection team delayed by roadblock. Hostiles approaching your location. Secure archive and evacuate to Site 117. Authorization, Castillo. The message's implications were clear. The protection team Castillo had promised had been deliberately intercepted, and whoever had forced the director's vehicle off the road had now traced the Sentinel activation signal to Jackson's farm. Making a split-second decision, Jackson grabbed the tackle box containing the archive, his grandfather's pocket watch, a flashlight, and his shotgun. With Max following closely, he slipped out the back door and moved swiftly through the shadows toward the equipment barn where his tractor was stored. From this vantage point, he could see 3 figures emerging from the SUV, their movements betraying military training. They carried tactical gear and what appeared to be signal detection equipment, professionals conducting a methodical search rather than common criminals. The tractor would be too loud and too slow, likely drawing immediate attention. Instead, Jackson moved to the far corner of the barn, where he kept his snowmobile covered and maintained for winter emergencies. The machine was designed for minimal noise, a feature he'd paid extra for to avoid disturbing wildlife during winter checks of his property boundaries. As he secured the tackle box to the snowmobile's storage compartment, Jackson heard the distinctive sound of his farmhouse door being forced open. The intruders had abandoned any pretense of subtlety, clearly operating under time constraints that required immediate action. Starting the snowmobile, Jackson kept the lights off, relying on moonlight, reflecting off snow and his intimate knowledge of the property to navigate. With Max running alongside, he took a circuitous route toward the northeast barn, avoiding open areas and using the tree line for cover whenever possible. Behind him, he could hear voices shouting and vehicle engines starting as the intruders realized their target had escaped. Searchlights began sweeping across the property, methodically tracking outward from the farmhouse. Reaching the northeast barn, Jackson quickly dismounted and used the pocket watch to access the hidden bunker. The stairway illuminated automatically as before, but this time he noticed a control panel inside the main door that hadn't activated during his previous visit. The scanner Castillo had provided now displayed emergency protocols available. Initiate? With the sounds of pursuit growing closer, Jackson tapped yes without hesitation. Immediately, red warning lights replaced the standard illumination throughout the bunker, and a mechanical voice announced, "Sentinel Site 117 lockdown initiated. Security measures activating." From his position at the bunker entrance, Jackson watched in astonishment as hidden panels in the barn ceiling retracted, revealing sophisticated defense systems that had been concealed for decades. Motion sensors, surveillance cameras, and what appeared to be non-lethal deterrent devices designed to secure the perimeter without causing permanent harm. The bunker door sealed automatically behind him as he descended into the main chamber, where communication systems were now fully activated. A secure video link established itself without his input, and Director Castillo's face appeared on the main screen. "Mr. Reed, are you secure? Do you have the archive?" "I'm inside the bunker," Jackson confirmed, breathing heavily from the exertion and adrenaline. "I found what I think is the archive, some kind of specialized data device in my grandfather's old tackle box. There are armed men on my property, at least 3 that I saw." "4, Castillo corrected grimly. "Our satellite coverage showed a 4th operator maintaining position at your access road. These aren't ordinary mercenaries, Mr. Reed. They're former special operations personnel working for an organization that's been attempting to locate Sentinel archives for years." The director's expression was deadly serious. "Did they see you enter the bunker?" "I don't think so. I used the snowmobile to approach from the south side, kept to the tree line." "Good. The site's defensive system should keep them at bay until our team can redirect to your location." The roadblock they encountered was sophisticated, designed to appear as a standard emergency closure due to storm damage. "It's being cleared now, but we're still approximately 40 minutes out." Jackson set the tackle box on the communications desk. "What exactly am I carrying, Director? The journal mentions presidential continuity documentation, but why would anyone risk attacking a government official to find it?" Castillo hesitated, clearly weighing operational security against Jackson's need to understand the situation he'd been thrust into. "The archive contains recordings of presidential decisions made during 7 critical national security events between 1962 and 1987, events that required activation of the Sentinel network and evacuations to sites like your grandfather's. During these events, presidents sometimes made decisions that bypassed normal chains of command, decisions that needed to be documented but couldn't enter normal government records without creating security vulnerabilities or public panic. Such as, Jackson pressed, such as authorization protocols for nuclear responses that contradicted published policy, contingency plans for scenarios involving domestic insurrection, and in one case, temporary transfer of presidential authority during a medical emergency that was never disclosed to the public. Castillo's expression remained carefully neutral. "History as taught rarely matches history as lived, Mr. Reed." Before Jackson could process these implications, the bunker's security system issued an alert. "Perimeter breach detected, multiple hostiles approaching northeast quadrant." On the security monitors, Jackson could see 3 figures moving methodically toward the barn, using tactical formation and carrying what appeared to be specialized scanning equipment. The 4th remained with their vehicle, apparently coordinating the operation. "They've tracked the Sentinel signal to the barn," Castillo observed. "The security systems will engage non-lethal countermeasures, but these operators are well trained. They likely have countermeasures of their own. As if confirming his assessment, one of the intruders deployed what appeared to be a signal jamming device. Immediately, several of the bunker's external sensors went offline, and the security feed began to degrade. "They're trying to disable the defensive systems," Castillo explained urgently. "Mr. Reed, there's a protocol we need to initiate immediately. Your grandfather's facility contains a feature that only 7 Sentinel sites were equipped with, a secure data transmission capability designed for precisely this situation." He guided Jackson to a specialized console at the rear of the bunker, previously inactive during his earlier exploration. "We need to transfer the archive's contents to secure storage before those individuals can breach the facility. They want that data device intact, but they'll settle for destroying it if capture becomes impossible." As Jackson placed the data device into a receptor slot that matched its unusual configuration perfectly, the bunker lights flickered momentarily. On the security monitors, he could see the intruders had reached the barn entrance and were deploying what appeared to be breaching equipment. "Transmission initiated," the system announced. "Estimated completion time, 12 minutes. "That's too long," Castillo said grimly. "Their equipment will breach the barn's outer security within 5 minutes at most. Once they locate the bunker entrance, the internal defenses will slow them down, but they'll eventually get through." Jackson Reed, who had awakened just 2 days earlier as a struggling farmer, concerned only with saving his family's legacy, now found himself defending that legacy in ways he could never have imagined. Protecting classified presidential records in a secret bunker while professional operatives attempted to breach its defenses. What neither Jackson nor Director Castillo could know as the data transfer began was that the archive contained something far more significant than even Castillo realized. Something Thomas Reed had added to the official records before sealing the facility in 1987. Something that would not only change Jackson's life forever, but potentially alter the course of American political history. The security monitors showed the intruders methodically disabling the barn's external defenses, their movements betraying professional training and familiarity with the Sentinel system's architecture. They weren't simply well-equipped mercenaries. They knew exactly what they were looking for and how to neutralize the protections around it. "Who are these people?" Jackson asked, dividing his attention between the security feed and the data. Transfer progress bar inching forward too slowly for comfort. "We believe they're affiliated with an organization called Nexus," Director Castillo explained, his image occasionally flickering as the intruders' jamming equipment affected the bunker's communications. "Former intelligence and military personnel who sell services to the highest bidder. They've been particularly interested in Cold War-era contingency programs like Sentinel for years." On the monitor, one of the operatives attached a device to the barn's electrical junction box. Moments later, the bunker lights dimmed briefly before emergency systems compensated. "They're trying to cut power to disrupt the transfer," Castillo noted. "The backup systems will maintain essential functions, but it might slow the process." The progress indicator confirmed his concern, recalculating to show 15 minutes remaining instead of the original 12. Outside, the intruders had located the concealed entrance to the bunker and were preparing breaching equipment. "Mr. Reed, there's an emergency protocol we need to implement," Castillo said, his tone shifting to one of urgent command. "Your grandfather's facility was designated as a final repository, one of only 3 in the Sentinel network. That means it contains emergency defensive capabilities beyond standard sites." He guided Jackson to a reinforced cabinet that had remained locked during his earlier exploration. "Use your grandfather's watch on the authentication panel. Inside you'll find a red case marked Terminal Countermeasures. We need to prepare it for potential deployment." The term terminal countermeasures sent a chill through Jackson. "Are we talking about explosives destroying the facility?" "Not explosives," Castillo clarified quickly. A specialized EMP device designed to permanently disable all electronic equipment within a half-mile radius without causing structural damage. It would render the archive and all scanning equipment useless if the facility is breached before the transfer completes. Jackson used the pocket watch to open the cabinet, revealing the red case Castillo had described. Inside was a device that looked like a sophisticated timer connected to what appeared to be a modified military radio. It's prepped for deployment, Jackson confirmed, following Castillo's instructions for setting up the device. But if we activate this, won't it also stop the data transfer? The transfer console is hardened against EMP, specifically to enable transmission even in worst-case scenarios, Castillo explained. But the countermeasure is absolutely last resort. Once activated, this facility would be permanently non-functional. As Jackson finished preparing the device, Max, who had remained unusually calm during the crisis, suddenly began growling toward the ceiling. Moments later, the security monitors showed fine dust filtering down from above. The intruders had begun, cutting through the reinforced concrete, separating the barn floor from the bunker entrance. They're moving faster than expected, Castillo observed grimly. Our team is still 28 minutes out. The transfer needs at least 15 to complete. We're going to be cutting it close. I'm not just going to sit here and wait, Jackson decided, checking his shotgun. This is my property, my family's legacy. There has to be something more I can do besides prepare for the worst. There is, Castillo responded, his expression shifting to one of grudging respect. Your grandfather installed manual overrides. For most of the facility's defensive systems, redundancies in case the automated controls were compromised. They're not in our official schematics, but if Thomas Reed followed standard Sentinel Keeper protocols, they should be accessible through dedicated control panels. Following Castillo's guidance, Jackson located a concealed access point behind what appeared to be an ordinary maintenance panel. Inside was a series of manual switches labeled with his grandfather's neat handwriting, emergency protocols that had been hidden from even the government's own records. Intruder countermeasures, Jackson read from one switch label. What exactly will this do? Sentinel sites were designed with non-lethal defensive capabilities, Castillo explained. Disorientation systems, incapacitating sound frequencies, temporary blinding lights. The automated systems deploy these in sequence, which experienced operators can anticipate and counter. The manual override would activate all systems simultaneously, overwhelming even prepared intruders. Without hesitation, Jackson flipped the switch. On the security monitors, the effect was immediate and dramatic. The three operatives who had been methodically working to breach the entrance suddenly dropped their equipment, hands moving to protect eyes and ears as the barn's hidden defense systems unleashed their full capability at once. That bought us some time, Castillo noted with approval, but they'll have protective gear in their vehicle. Expect them to regroup and return with enhanced countermeasures. Sure enough, the leader of the intruders retreated to their SUV, returning moments later with what appeared to be specialized helmets designed to neutralize the sensory attacks. Though clearly affected by the defensive measures, they resumed their breaching efforts with grim determination. Transfer at 62%, the system announced. Estimated time to completion, 9 minutes, 17 seconds. The lead operative had nearly completed cutting through the reinforced concrete protecting the bunker entrance. Once they breached that barrier, they would face the bunker's blast door. Formidable but not impenetrable with the right equipment, which they clearly possessed. Mr. Reed, Castillo said with measured urgency, there's something else you should know about the archive. Your grandfather wasn't just storing official records, he was protecting evidence. Evidence of what? Operation Blackbriar, a 1986 covert Action authorized outside normal channels that resulted in significant civilian casualties. The authorization was verbal only, with all official records indicating the operation never occurred. The only documentation is in the archive your grandfather maintained. The revelation landed heavily. You're saying the government carried out an operation that killed civilians, then erased all evidence, except what's in this data device. I'm saying a faction within the government did so, yes, and the current administration has been working to declassify and acknowledge these actions as part of a broader transparency initiative. The President specifically tasked me with locating the remaining Sentinel archives to support this effort. Jackson processed this information as the security monitor showed the intruders completing their cut through the concrete. The leader retrieved a specialized breaching charge from their equipment pack designed to defeat the blast door that was now their final obstacle. That's why you were on that road during the blizzard, Jackson realized. You were coming to find the archive. Yes. Intelligence indicated your grandfather's site might still be intact, despite being listed as decommissioned in official records. I was en route to verify its status when my vehicle was forced off the road by the same organization currently trying to breach your bunker. But why would they want to prevent declassification? Wouldn't exposing past wrongdoing serve their interests if they're against the government? They don't want to expose it. They want to exploit it, Castillo explained grimly. The archive contains names of officials who authorized the operation, some of whom hold significant positions today. That information is leverage for blackmail, not justice. As the intruders prepared to place the breaching charge on the blast door, the bunker communication system suddenly issued an alert. Perimeter notification. Authorized vehicles approaching. From Eastern Access Road, Sentinel security transponders detected. The protection team, Castillo confirmed, visible relief in his expression. They've bypassed the roadblock and will be on site in less than 3 minutes. The intruders must have received the same information through their own monitoring equipment as their approach suddenly changed. Rather than continuing with the methodical breach, the leader began hastily attaching what appeared to be a smaller, cruder explosive device to the blast door. They're switching tactics, Castillo warned. They know they don't have time to breach properly, so they're going to attempt a forced entry that might damage the archive rather than let it be secured. The leader of the intruders finished setting the device and retreated up the stairs. On the monitor, Jackson could see all 3 operatives moving quickly toward their vehicle, abandoning equipment in their haste. Transfer at 87%, the system announced. Estimated time to completion, 4 minutes 32 seconds. They've left a demolition charge, Castillo said urgently. Is there any way to access the area between the concrete layer and the blast door? Jackson thought quickly, remembering his grandfather's meticulous documentation of the farm's structures. There's a maintenance conduit that runs alongside the entrance shaft. It was designed for accessing utilities without opening the main door. Moving quickly to a narrow panel disguised as part of the wall structure, Jackson removed the cover to reveal a tight passage barely wide enough for a person to navigate. I think I can reach the blast door from inside this conduit. Mr. Reed, that's an extraordinary risk, Castillo cautioned. If the charge detonates while you're in the conduit, and if it detonates while I'm in here, we lose the archive and possibly the entire facility, Jackson countered. My grandfather protected this place for 30 years. I'm not going to lose it now when we're this close. Before Castillo could object further, Jackson squeezed into the narrow passage, using his flashlight to navigate the confined space. Max whined anxiously from the main chamber, sensing his master's danger but unable to follow. The maintenance conduit was cramped and dusty, clearly unused since the facility's active days. Jackson moved as quickly as the tight space allowed, following the path as it curved alongside the main entrance shaft. After approximately 20 feet, He reached a small access panel that, according to the facility schematic Castillo had shared, should open into the space just outside the blast door. Carefully removing the panel, Jackson found himself looking at the backside of the improvised explosive device the intruders had placed. Even with his limited military experience, he could recognize it was a hastily assembled but effective demolition charge, designed to breach the door with brute force rather than precision. A simple digital timer showed 3 minutes remaining. "I can see the device," Jackson reported through his satellite phone. "It's got a timer set for 3 minutes. Can you talk me through disarming it?" "Describe exactly what you see," Castillo instructed, his tone professional but urgent. Jackson detailed the configuration of wires and components as precisely as possible, knowing that any error in communication could be catastrophic. "Standard field expedient charge with a digital timer," Castillo assessed. "There should be a red wire connecting the timer to the detonator. Cutting that wire will disconnect the timing circuit." "I see it. But there's also a secondary wire running to what looks like a motion sensor," Jackson observed. "Some kind of anti-tampering measure?" "Correct assessment," Castillo confirmed. "They've added a fail-safe. You'll need to immobilize the sensor before cutting the wire. Any movement of the device after the timer is activated would trigger immediate detonation." Using skills he hadn't called upon since his military days, Jackson carefully stabilized the motion sensor with materials from his pocket, then used his pocket knife to sever the connection between the timer and the detonator. The timer continued counting down, but it was now disconnected from the explosive component. "I think it worked," Jackson reported, carefully extracting himself from the confined space. "Timer's still running, but it's been disconnected." As he squeezed back through the maintenance conduit toward the main chamber, Jackson could hear vehicles approaching outside, the distinctive sound of government SUVs moving at high speed across his property. "Transfer complete," the system announced as Jackson emerged from the conduit. "Archive secured, initiating verification protocols." On the security monitors, he could see the Nexus operatives' vehicles speeding away across his fields, pursued by 2 black SUVs bearing government markings. A third government vehicle stopped at the barn, and armed personnel in tactical gear quickly secured the area, clearing the abandoned equipment. "Mr. Reed," Director Castillo's voice came through the communication system with renewed clarity as the jamming effects faded. "Status report?" "Device neutralized," Jackson confirmed, brushing dust from his clothes. "And it sounds like the transfer completed successfully. Confirmed, the archive data is now secured in multiple classified repositories. The immediate threat has been neutralized, though we'll maintain security at your property until we can be certain no additional Nexus teams are in the area." As the adrenaline of the immediate crisis began to subside, Jackson found himself looking around the bunker with new understanding. This wasn't just a Cold War relic or a curiosity from his grandfather's past. It was a piece of living history, a facility that had played a role in preserving the nation's governance during critical moments that the public had never known about. "What happens now?" he asked, absently scratching Max behind the ears as the dog pressed against his leg, relieved that his master had returned safely from the maintenance conduit. "Now," Castillo said with surprising frankness, "you have a choice to make. The activation of Site-117 and the archives transfer have put certain protocols in motion, including the official reinstatement of your property in the modern equivalent of the Sentinel program. But your participation would need to be voluntary." What Jackson Reed couldn't know as he considered this proposition, standing in a secret bunker that had just been the target of professional operators, his quiet farming life irrevocably altered, was that the archive's contents included one file his grandfather had added personally, a file documenting a conversation between Thomas Reed and a young senator who would one day become president, discussing a constitutional crisis that had been hidden from the American people for more than 3 decades. 6 months after the winter blizzard that had changed everything, Jackson Reed stood at the edge of his cornfield, watching as the summer sun cast long shadows across land that was more vibrant and productive than it had been in decades. State-of-the-art, irrigation systems now ensured consistent water delivery regardless of rainfall patterns, and soil enhancement programs had restored nutrients depleted by years of conventional farming. The farm's transformation matched his own. No longer the struggling farmer desperately fighting foreclosure, Jackson Reed now operated one of the most technologically advanced agricultural operations in the county, while simultaneously serving as sentinel keeper for what was officially designated Continuity Site Echo 117, Max barked excitedly, drawing Jackson's attention to a black SUV approaching along the newly paved private road, a road that officially led to what government documents described as an agricultural research station, but actually provided access to the thoroughly modernized Sentinel facility beneath the northeast barn. Director Marcus Castillo emerged from the vehicle, moving with the easy confidence of someone who had fully recovered from his injuries. In the months since the archive incident, he had become a regular visitor to the Reed farm, overseeing the facility's integration into the modern continuity of government program, while developing what could only be described as a friendship with the man who had rescued him during the blizzard. Quite a difference from when we first met, Castillo observed, nodding toward the thriving crops and renovated buildings. The Board of Agricultural Development grant must have been substantial. This was their private shorthand for the classified funding that had transformed the property, officially registered as research grants from a government agricultural program that existed primarily on paper. It's made a difference, Jackson acknowledged, though I sometimes miss the simplicity of just worrying about the weather and grain prices. Castillo smiled, understanding the understatement. Jackson's life now included security clearances, confidentiality agreements, and regular briefings on national emergency protocols, a far cry from the isolated existence he'd led before pulling. A stranded motorist from a snowdrift. The president's motorcade will arrive in approximately 40 minutes, Castillo noted, checking his watch. The advance team has already secured the perimeter. This is quite an unusual honor, Mr. Reed. Presidential visits to Sentinel facilities are extraordinarily rare, even for high-priority sites. Jackson nodded, understanding the significance. In the months following the archive incident, the carefully selected contents had been reviewed at the highest levels of government. Operation Blackbriar had been officially acknowledged, with a presidential apology issued to the affected communities and compensation provided to victims' families. Several former officials had been indicted, while others had quietly resigned from prestigious positions rather than face public scrutiny. But it was the additional file, the one Thomas Reed had personally added to the archive, that had prompted today's unprecedented presidential visit. Have you reviewed the file yet? Castillo asked, his tone carefully neutral despite the extraordinary nature of the question. The director had personally authorized Jackson's clearance to access the full archive contents after the Nexus operation had been neutralized. Last night, Jackson confirmed, recalling the hours he'd spent in the secure viewing room installed beneath his property, reading his grandfather's detailed documentation of a constitutional crisis that had nearly fractured the government 34 years earlier. The file described a period during which a sitting president had been temporarily incapacitated, not physically but psychologically, following a classified briefing about an imminent threat. For 72 critical hours, executive authority had been quietly maintained by a close circle of advisors operating without constitutional authority, keeping the situation hidden from Congress, the public, and even most of the cabinet. Among those advisors had been a young senator who would one day become the current president, a man who had worked with Thomas Reed to ensure the unauthorized transfer of power remained functional, while simultaneously creating a legal pathway back. to constitutional governance. "It's quite a legacy your grandfather left," Castillo observed as they walked toward the northeast barn, where the underground facility had been transformed from a Cold War relic to a modern command center. He could have simply followed protocols, documented the events in the official record, and filed it away. Instead, he created a parallel record, insurance that the truth would eventually come to light. "Grandpa always said that governments need good people serving from both inside and outside the system," Jackson replied. He saw himself as straddling that line, loyal to his country but accountable to something bigger than any administration. The barn's exterior remained deliberately weathered, maintaining the appearance of an ordinary agricultural structure despite the sophisticated facility hidden beneath. Inside, however, the transformation was remarkable. The concealed entrance now featured state-of-the-art biometric security, and the bunker itself had been expanded and modernized while preserving key historical elements. In the main chamber, a framed photograph had been mounted on the wall, Thomas Reed standing beside three other men, including the much younger version of the current president. Beneath it, a simple bronze plaque read, "The Guardians stand between the people," and "The darkness, your grandfather's words?" Castillo inquired, noting the inscription. "Something he used to say when I'd ask why he chose to farm in such an isolated location," Jackson confirmed. "I always thought he was talking about growing food, being part of the system that keeps people fed. I never realized he meant something more literal." As they completed final preparations for the presidential visit, Jackson reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had brought him to this moment. A chance decision to help what appeared to be a stranded motorist during a blizzard had revealed a family legacy he'd never suspected, connecting him to historical events that had shaped the nation from the shadows. The renovation of the Sentinel facility had uncovered additional surprises, including a sealed vault beneath the main chamber that contained personal messages Thomas Reed had left for the grandson he correctly predicted would someday discover his secret legacy. These included detailed journals documenting his decades of service, family photographs taken at the facility during quieter moments, and letters explaining the moral complexities of maintaining government secrets while ensuring accountability. "Presidential motorcade approaching the outer perimeter," announced the security system. "Estimated arrival in 12 minutes. Jackson straightened his tie, a concession to formality he rarely made, but which seemed appropriate for meeting the president. "Hard to believe it's been 6 months since I pulled you from that car," he commented to Castillo. "Feels like a different lifetime." "For both of us," the director agreed. "Though I maintain that fortuitous accident was the most efficient recruitment method in Sentinel history. Finding someone with your particular combination of qualities would have been nearly impossible through conventional channels." A subtle smile crossed Jackson's face. "You still think it was an accident, that storm forcing you off the road near my property, right when Nexus was closing in on the archive?" Castillo raised an eyebrow. "You suspect otherwise?" "Let's just say I found some interesting notes in my grandfather's personal journals. He maintained connections with certain government officials long after his official retirement. The timing of your accident happening exactly when it did, where it did, feels like something he might have arranged from beyond the grave. Before Castillo could respond to this unexpected theory, the communication system announced the presidential motorcade's arrival. They made their way to the surface, emerging into the summer sunshine as the procession of vehicles arrived with precise choreography. The President of the United States emerged from the armored limousine with the confident bearing of a man accustomed to history's spotlight. In his mid-70s now, he nonetheless moved with energy and purpose, immediately approaching Jackson with an extended hand. "Mr. Reed," he greeted him warmly, "I've been looking forward to meeting Thomas Reed's grandson." Your grandfather was an extraordinary American whose service can never be publicly recognized, but is deeply appreciated nonetheless. Thank you, Mr. President, Jackson replied, finding himself unexpectedly moved by the personal acknowledgement of his grandfather's work. I'm still learning about the full scope of his contributions, as are we all, the president responded with surprising candor. Your grandfather understood something crucial about governance, that systems require both transparency and discretion to function properly. The archive he maintained struck that balance perfectly, ensuring accountability without compromising security. The presidential visit included a tour of the renovated facility, a classified briefing on its current capabilities, and a private conversation between the president and Jackson that touched on both historical events and future possibilities. Throughout the tour, Jackson noted how the president paused at various points to share personal recollections of Thomas Reed, stories that aligned with the journals Jackson had been reading, but added dimensions only someone who had worked alongside his grandfather could provide. As the visit concluded and the presidential motorcade prepared to depart, the president took a moment for a final private word with Jackson. Your grandfather once told me that the true strength of our system lies not in its institutions, but in individuals willing to make difficult choices when necessary, he said, his expression reflecting decades of such choices. The decision to step in during that blizzard when others would have driven past, that's the quality he most hoped would continue in his family line. With a firm handshake and a promise to remain personally engaged with the Echo 117 facility's development, the president departed, leaving Jackson standing beside Director Castillo as the motorcade disappeared down the private road. What happens now? Jackson asked as they walked back toward the farmhouse, where Max waited patiently on the porch. Now you continue what your grandfather started, Castillo replied. Maintaining this facility, preserving its historical significance while adapting it to modern requirements. And farming, of course. The perfect cover operation hasn't changed since your grandfather's day. Jackson smiled at the characterization of his lifelong profession as a cover operation, though in truth, the automated systems installed during the renovation had reduced the labor requirements significantly, allowing him to balance both responsibilities. And Nexus, he asked, referring to the organization whose operatives had nearly breached the facility during their attempt to secure the archive. Significantly disrupted but not eliminated, Castillo admitted. Your grandfather's documentation provided enough information to identify several key members, but organizations like that are designed to survive decapitation strikes. They'll regroup eventually, possibly under a different name, which means they might come looking for whatever else might be hidden here. Jackson concluded, the implications clear. Precisely why we've integrated this site into the active security network rather than simply extracting the archive and decommissioning it, Castillo confirmed. Echo 117 is now officially designated as a heritage site, one of only 3 Sentinel facilities being preserved for their historical significance while maintaining operational capabilities. As they reached the farmhouse, Jackson's satellite phone chimed with an incoming message, a weather alert warning of a significant storm system developing to the west, potentially bringing heavy rainfall within the next 24 hours. Looks like I need to adjust the irrigation scheduling, Jackson noted, the practical concerns of farming temporarily overshadowing national security considerations. Castillo smiled at this juxtaposition of the ordinary and the extraordinary that now characterized Jackson Reed's life. Your grandfather would approve. He always maintained that growing food and guarding freedom were complementary responsibilities, both essential to a functioning society. That evening, after Castillo had departed, and the heightened security presence had returned to its more discreet standard configuration, Jackson sat on his porch, watching distant lightning illuminate the approaching storm clouds. Max dozed at his feet, occasionally twitching in dreams that likely involved chasing rabbits rather than national security. Concerns. On the table beside him lay his grandfather's journal, open to an entry dated just days before his death. The faded handwriting remained clear despite the years. "The farm will pass to my son, and eventually to my grandson, Jackson. I've observed him closely during his visits. He has the Reed qualities that matter most: integrity, responsibility, the instinct to help rather than harm. I believe when the time comes, he will make the right choice without needing to know why it matters. The sentinel may sleep, but it never truly dies. It waits for the right moment, the right person to awaken it once more." The approaching storm brought with it the scent of rain and renewal, a farmer's blessing after years of drought. Yet Jackson knew it also symbolized the dual nature of his inheritance: the visible legacy of land and livelihood, and the hidden responsibility of secrets kept and revealed at the proper time. 6 months ago, he had been a struggling farmer facing foreclosure, his only concern the survival of his family's agricultural heritage. Today, he was both farmer and guardian, caretaker of fields that fed people and keeper of secrets that protected them. As the first heavy raindrops began to fall, Jackson Reed closed his grandfather's journal and went inside, ready for whatever storms, meteorological or geopolitical, might come next. The unlikely journey that had begun with a simple act of compassion during a blizzard had transformed not just his circumstances, but his understanding of his place in the world. In rescuing what he thought was simply an injured veteran, Jackson Reed had found not just his family's hidden legacy, but his own purpose, continuing the essential work that happens in the spaces between official history and lived experience, where ordinary people make extraordinary choices that shape a nation's future without ever appearing in its textbooks. And somewhere, he felt certain, Thomas Reed was nodding in approval. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.